Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been counting down the days until this moment arrived. After 18 months of the most brutal training known to military forces, she had finally earned her place among the Navy SEALs. The graduation ceremony was supposed to be a celebration, but as she stood in the packed auditorium filled with 250 elite Special Forces members, she could feel the weight of skeptical stares boring into her back. The whispers had followed her throughout training. Questions about whether standards had been lowered, doubts about her physical capabilities, speculation about political correctness driving her selection. Sarah had heard them all, and she had answered each doubt with performance that exceeded expectations. Her obstacle course times ranked in the top 10%. Her marksmanship scores were flawless. Her underwater endurance tests had left instructors shaking their heads in amazement, but still, the whispers persisted. The ceremony had concluded with applause that felt more polite than enthusiastic. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah noticed a group of seasoned SEALs gathering near the refreshment table. Their conversation grew animated as they glanced in her direction. She recognized most of them from reputation. Veterans with multiple combat deployments and decorations that spoke of valor under fire. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward from the group. At 6 feet 4 inches and built like a linebacker, he commanded respect through presence alone. His service record included 3 Purple Hearts and countless classified missions that had earned him legendary status among Special Operations Forces. When he spoke, people listened. Well, Rodriguez called out loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Look what we have here. The Navy's newest diversity hire." The room fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the catering staff paused their cleanup to watch what was unfolding. Sarah felt every eye in the auditorium turn toward her. This was the moment she had prepared for, though she had hoped it would never come. Sarah turned slowly to face Rodriguez, her expression calm and controlled. Years of martial arts training had taught her to remain centered when confronted with aggression. "Chief Rodriguez," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Tell me something, Chen," Rodriguez continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "What happens when the bullets start flying and your squad is counting on you to carry a wounded teammate? You think your little gymnast routine is going to help when lives are on the line?" The gathering crowd was growing larger. Sarah could see phone cameras being discreetly positioned. She knew that whatever happened in the next few minutes would define her entire career. Every future mission, every partnership, every moment of trust would be measured against this encounter. "I think my performance record speaks for itself, Chief," Sarah replied evenly. Her voice carried clearly across the silent auditorium. "Perhaps you'd like to review my training scores." Rodriguez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Training scores don't mean anything in the real world, sweetheart. Combat isn't about checking boxes on a fitness test. It's about raw strength and the willingness to do whatever it takes to complete the mission." He stepped closer, using his considerable height advantage to loom over her. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've carried wounded men twice your size out of hostile territory. I've kicked down doors and cleared rooms while you were probably playing with dolls." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the tension building among the spectators. Some looked uncomfortable with Rodriguez's aggressive approach, while others seemed eager to see how she would respond. This was more than just a confrontation between 2 service members. It was a test of whether she belonged in their brotherhood. "Chief Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I understand your concerns about unit readiness, but questioning my qualifications based on assumptions rather than evidence isn't helping anyone." "Evidence?" Rodriguez scoffed. "You want evidence? Let's see some evidence right now." "Oh." Without warning, he swung his massive hand toward her face in what appeared to be a casual backhand gesture. The movement was fast and unexpected, designed to catch her off guard and demonstrate her vulnerability. In Rodriguez's mind, this would prove his point about the reality gap between training scenarios and real-world threats. But Rodriguez had made a critical miscalculation. He had assumed that Sarah's small stature and composed demeanor indicated weakness. He had failed to account for her extensive background in mixed martial arts. Her lightning-fast reflexes honed through years of competitive fighting, and her ability to read body language and anticipate attacks. The moment Rodriguez's hand began to move, Sarah's training took over. Time seemed to slow as her mind processed the incoming threat and calculated the optimal response. Her body moved with fluid precision, every motion the result of countless hours of practice and muscle memory. She ducked under the swing with minimal movement, just enough to let his hand pass harmlessly over her head. In the same motion, she pivoted on her left foot and drove her right elbow upward with devastating accuracy. The strike connected with Rodriguez's solar plexus, the bundle of nerves located just below the ribcage that controls breathing and balance. The impact was immediate and catastrophic for Rodriguez. His diaphragm spasmed, cutting off his air supply and sending waves of paralyzing pain through his torso. His knees buckled as his body's automatic responses shut down non-essential functions to deal with the trauma. But Sarah wasn't finished. As Rodriguez began to fall forward, gasping for breath, she grabbed his right wrist and used his own momentum against him. A perfectly executed hip throw sent all 240 pounds of the chief petty officer sailing through the air before he crashed onto the polished floor with a thunderous impact that echoed throughout the auditorium. Rodriguez lay motionless for several seconds, his body struggling to restart normal respiratory function, while his brain tried to process what had just happened. The elite warrior who had survived countless combat operations had been neutralized by an opponent half his size in less than 3 seconds. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. 250 of the world's most elite fighters stood frozen in stunned amazement. These were men who had seen combat in every corner of the globe, who had witnessed incredible displays of skill and courage under the most extreme conditions. But none of them had expected to see their respected colleague taken down so decisively by the very person they had been questioning. Sarah stood over Rodriguez's prone form, her breathing barely elevated despite the explosive action she had just performed. Her uniform remained perfectly pressed, her composure unshaken. She looked down at the man who had challenged her worthiness and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. "Chief Rodriguez, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" The question was delivered with genuine concern, free of mockery or triumph. This wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about establishing respect and demonstrating capability. Sarah extended her hand to help Rodriguez to his feet, a gesture that spoke volumes about her character and professionalism. Rodriguez slowly pushed himself up to a sitting position, still struggling to catch his breath. His face was flushed with embarrassment as much as physical distress. Around him, his fellow SEALs began to murmur among themselves, their whispered conversations a mixture of shock, admiration, and reassessment of their assumptions. "What the hell just happened?" someone whispered near the back of the crowd. "Did she just take down Rodriguez? That was the fastest thing I've ever seen. Where did she learn to fight like that?" Sarah's demonstration had answered more questions than any training report or fitness score ever could. In those brief seconds of combat, she had proven that she possessed not only the technical skills necessary for special operations, but also the mental toughness and tactical awareness that defined true warriors. As Rodriguez finally accepted her help and got back to his feet, the dynamic in the room had fundamentally shifted. The whispers and doubts that had followed Sarah throughout training were being replaced by something much more valuable. Respect earned through action, rather than granted through assumption. The gathering began to disperse slowly, with small groups of SEALs talking quietly among themselves. Sarah could see the change in their body language, the way they looked at her now compared to just minutes earlier. She had crossed an invisible threshold, moving from outsider to accepted member through the universal language that all warriors understood. Demonstrated competence under pressure. But even as she felt the satisfaction of proving herself, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The real tests would come in operational environments where the stakes were measured in lives rather than pride. This confrontation had won her the right to be taken seriously, but earning trust in life or death situations would require much more than a single impressive display of fighting skills. Rodriguez straightened his uniform and cleared his throat, his professional composure gradually returning despite his obvious discomfort. The room waited to see how he would respond to this unprecedented situation. "Well," he said finally, his voice hoarse but carrying clearly across the auditorium, I guess the training program is more thorough than I gave it credit for." It wasn't exactly an apology, but coming from Marcus Rodriguez, it was as close to an admission of error as anyone had ever heard. The acknowledgement rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water, creating waves of understanding and acceptance that would reshape how Sarah Chen was perceived within the special operations community. The graduation ceremony had ended very differently than anyone had anticipated. But for Sarah, it felt like her real career was just beginning. 6 months after the graduation incident, Sarah Chen found herself strapped into the cramped cargo hold of a MH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, flying through the darkness over hostile territory. The rhythmic thumping of the rotor blades provided a steady soundtrack to her pre-mission mental preparation. Around her sat 5 other members of SEAL Team 7. Their faces painted with camouflage and their gear checked and rechecked with obsessive precision. The mission briefing had been classified at the highest levels. Intelligence indicated that a high-value terrorist target was hiding in a compound deep within enemy territory. The target had been responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed dozens of American service members and hundreds of civilians. Multiple attempts to capture or eliminate him through conventional means had failed, making this direct action mission their last best option. What made this operation particularly challenging was the compound's location in a densely populated urban area. Civilian casualties had to be minimized, escape routes were limited, and enemy reinforcements could arrive within minutes of the first shot being fired. The mission required surgical precision executed under extreme time pressure. Chief Rodriguez sat across from Sarah in the helicopter's dim red lighting. Their relationship had evolved considerably since their confrontation at graduation. While he remained gruff and demanding, there was now an underlying respect in their interactions. He had personally requested her inclusion on his squad, a decision that had surprised many in the command structure. "Chen," Rodriguez called over the engine noise, "remember what we discussed about the secondary exit route?" Sarah nodded, reviewing the memorized floor plans in her mind. The compound consisted of 3 buildings, connected by covered walkways. Intelligence suggested their target was most likely in the central structure, but they needed to be prepared for multiple scenarios. Her role was to secure the eastern approach while the rest of the team made entry from the west. The mission represented everything Sarah had trained for during her years of preparation. Every obstacle course, every underwater endurance test, every sleepless night of study had been building toward moments like this. But unlike training scenarios, there would be no second chances if something went wrong. 2 minutes out, the pilot announced through their headsets. Sarah felt the familiar pre-combat surge of adrenaline as her body prepared for action. Her breathing remained controlled and steady, a technique learned from years of martial arts practice. She had discovered that the mental discipline required for combat sports translated perfectly to military operations. The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, a small clearing approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound. Intelligence reports indicated minimal enemy activity in the immediate area, but Sarah knew that situation could change rapidly once their presence was detected. As the aircraft touched down, the 6-member team moved with practiced efficiency. Each operator knew their role precisely, and unnecessary communication was kept to minimum. They had rehearsed this mission dozens of times on mock-up structures, but Sarah understood that no training scenario could perfectly replicate the chaos and unpredictability of actual combat. The squad moved through the darkness using night vision equipment that turned the world into green-tinted shadows. Their route took them through narrow alleyways and across rooftops, avoiding the main streets where enemy sentries might be posted. Sarah's small size proved advantageous as they navigated tight spaces and scaled walls that would have been challenging for larger operators. 20 minutes after leaving the helicopter, they reached their final approach position. The target compound lay ahead, its walls topped with razor wire and its corners guarded by armed sentries. Intelligence photos had shown the layout clearly, but seeing it in person revealed details that satellite imagery had missed. Rodriguez used hand signals to coordinate their final positioning. Sarah moved to her assigned overwatch position on a rooftop overlooking the compound's eastern wall. From this vantage point, she could provide covering fire for the main assault team while monitoring potential escape routes. The plan called for a simultaneous breach from multiple directions, overwhelming the defenders before they could organize effective resistance. Timing would be critical, as would their ability to distinguish between combatants and civilians in the darkness and confusion. Eagle 1 in position. Rodriguez reported quietly through their radio network. Eagle 2 ready, responded Petty Officer Williams from the southern approach. Eagle 3 set, confirmed Staff Sergeant Martinez at the main gate. Sarah adjusted her position behind the low wall that provided concealment and protection. Her rifle was equipped with a suppressed barrel and advanced optics that allowed for precise targeting even in minimal light conditions. Eagle 4 ready, she transmitted. The final preparations took only minutes, but Sarah used the time to mentally rehearse every aspect of her assignment. She identified primary and alternate firing positions, calculated range estimates to key points within the compound, and reviewed the recognition signals that would prevent friendly fire incidents. Execute, 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 Rodriguez commanded. The night exploded into controlled violence as the SEAL team initiated their assault. Breaching charges detonated simultaneously at 2 entry points, creating the confusion and disorientation that would give them tactical advantage. Sarah watched through her scope as Rodriguez's team flowed through the western breach like water finding the path of least resistance. Her job was to provide overwatch and eliminate any threats that emerged from the building complex. The training scenarios had prepared her for this moment, but the reality of combat brought an intensity that no simulation could replicate. Every movement in her field of view could represent a threat or an innocent civilian caught in the crossfire. 3 armed men emerged from a side building, moving toward the main structure where Rodriguez's team was operating. Sarah tracked them through her scope, confirming they carried weapons and posed a threat to her teammates. Her shots were precise and immediate, neutralizing the danger before it could develop into a serious problem. 3 tangos down on the east side, she reported calmly into her radio. The assault continued for exactly 12 minutes, though it felt like hours to Sarah as she maintained her vigilant watch. The target was successfully captured without civilian casualties, and the team prepared for extraction under increasing pressure from enemy reinforcements moving toward their location. But as they prepared to leave the compound, Sarah spotted movement that made her blood freeze. A figure in military gear was positioning himself with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, aiming directly at the building where her teammates were preparing to exit with their prisoner. The shot would kill everyone in the assault team. RPG threat, Eastern Building, 2nd floor. Sarah transmitted urgently, while simultaneously adjusting her aim. The distance was nearly 400 meters through urban obstacles. The target was partially concealed behind a concrete wall. The shot required compensation for wind, elevation, and the slight movement of the building due to recent explosions. It was the kind of shot that separated good snipers from exceptional ones. Sarah controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger with the same smooth precision she had used thousands of times on training ranges. The bullet traveled its trajectory in less than a second, striking the enemy fighter center mass just as he was preparing to fire his weapon. The RPG round discharged harmlessly into the air as the man collapsed, eliminating the threat to her teammates and allowing the extraction to continue without catastrophic loss of life. Threat neutralized, Sarah reported with the same calm professionalism she had maintained throughout the operation. The helicopter extraction proceeded flawlessly, with the entire team and their captured target safely aboard and headed back to friendly territory within minutes. As they lifted off from the landing zone, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of relief and satisfaction that followed successful completion of a dangerous mission. Rodriguez turned to her during the flight back to base, his expression serious but respectful. "That was outstanding shooting, Chen. You saved our lives back there." The acknowledgement carried special weight, coming from the man who had once questioned her qualifications. Combat had a way of stripping away preconceptions and revealing true capability. In the crucible of actual operations, Sarah had proven that her presence made the team stronger, not weaker. The debriefing sessions that followed would analyze every aspect of the mission, identifying lessons learned and areas for improvement. But for Sarah, the most important outcome was the solid foundation of trust and respect she had built with her teammates. The speculation about lowered standards and diversity hiring had been replaced by confidence in her abilities and appreciation for her contributions. The mission had been a complete success by every measurable standard. The high-value target was in custody. No team members had been wounded. Civilian casualties had been avoided. and valuable intelligence had been gathered from the compound. But perhaps most importantly for Sarah's career, she had demonstrated that gender was irrelevant when it came to operational effectiveness. As the helicopter approached their base, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that confrontation at graduation. The whispers and doubts had been replaced by inclusion and partnership. She had earned her place not through political considerations or adjusted standards, but through the same combination of skill, courage, and dedication that defined all elite warriors. The real test hadn't been proving herself to skeptics in a controlled environment. It had been performing flawlessly when lives depended on her abilities and when failure wasn't an option. In that crucible, Sarah Chen had established herself as a warrior worthy of wearing the SEAL trident. 2 years had passed since Sarah Chen first stepped into that graduation ceremony and faced the skepticism of 250 elite warriors. Now, as she stood before a new class of SEAL candidates at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center, she represented something that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. She was no longer the exception that proved a rule. She had become proof that excellence transcends all artificial boundaries. The training facility buzzed with activity as the newest class of candidates prepared for their final evaluation exercises. Among them were 3 women who had successfully completed the grueling selection process, following the path that Sarah had helped establish. Their presence in the program no longer generated controversy or whispered debates about standards. Instead, they were evaluated solely on their ability to meet the same demanding requirements that had challenged generations of warriors. Sarah's role had evolved beyond that of an operational team member. She had been selected to serve as an instructor, passing on the lessons learned from multiple successful combat deployments to the next generation of special operations forces. Her classroom covered advanced close-quarters combat techniques, emphasizing the importance of leverage, timing, and tactical awareness over raw physical strength. The irony wasn't lost on her that Chief Rodriguez had specifically recommended her for the instructor position. Their professional relationship had developed into genuine mutual respect based on shared experiences and proven competence. He often joined her training sessions, providing his own perspective on the subjects she taught. "Today we're going to discuss threat assessment and defensive tactics," Sarah announced to the assembled candidates. "Combat situations rarely develop the way we expect them to, and your survival often depends on your ability to read environmental cues and respond appropriately to unexpected aggression." The candidates listened with intense focus. They understood that every lesson taught at this facility had been purchased with blood and validated through real-world application. Sarah's reputation as both a skilled instructor and a proven combat veteran gave her words additional weight and credibility. "Can anyone tell me the most important factor in surviving a close-quarters confrontation?" she asked the group. A candidate raised his hand. "Superior firepower, ma'am." "Good guess, but incorrect," Sarah replied. "The most important factor is situational awareness. Understanding what's happening around you and anticipating threats before they fully develop gives you the tactical advantage that can mean the difference between success and failure." She moved to the center of the training mat, her movements fluid and controlled. "Let me demonstrate something that happened to me early in my career." Sarah had told this story countless times to different groups of candidates, but she never tired of sharing the lessons it contained. The confrontation with Rodriguez had become legendary within the special operations community, not because of its dramatic conclusion, but because of what it represented about preparation, composure, and professional response to adversity. "I was at a graduation ceremony when a senior enlisted man decided to test my qualifications through physical confrontation," she continued. "He was bigger, stronger, and more experienced than me. By traditional measures, he held every advantage." The candidates leaned forward with interest. They had all heard versions of this story through the military's informal information network, but hearing it directly from Sarah provided details and context that elevated it from gossip to professional instruction. "But he made several critical errors in his threat assessment," Sarah explained. "He assumed that my small size indicated weakness. He failed to observe visual cues that might have revealed my martial arts background. Most importantly, he let emotion override tactical thinking." She positioned herself in the same stance she had used that day, demonstrating the body mechanics that had allowed her to neutralize a much larger opponent. When he swung at me, I was already 3 moves ahead in my response sequence. His attack became the trigger for a defensive action I had rehearsed thousands of times. The demonstration that followed was precise and educational. Sarah showed how proper technique could overcome significant disadvantages in size and strength. She emphasized the importance of muscle memory, mental preparation, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. The real lesson here isn't about fighting techniques, she concluded. It's about preparation, meeting opportunity. Every hour you spend training, every scenario you rehearse, every skill you develop becomes available to you in crisis situations. After the formal instruction concluded, Sarah often remained available for individual questions and guidance. The candidates valued these informal mentoring sessions, recognizing that they were learning from someone who had faced every challenge they might encounter in their own careers. One of the female candidates approached her as the training area emptied. "Ma'am, do you ever regret joining the teams? I mean, considering all the resistance you faced initially?" Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. "Regret is the wrong word," she said. "The resistance was real, and it was challenging, but it also made me better. Every doubt I had to overcome forced me to push beyond what I thought were my limits." She gestured toward the training facility around them. "Look at this place now. Look at your class." The conversations aren't about whether women belong here anymore. They're about whether individual candidates can meet the standards. That's exactly how it should be. The young woman nodded, understanding the broader implications of Sarah's experience. "Did you know this would happen when you first started?" "Honestly, no," Sarah admitted. "I was focused on proving myself worthy of the opportunity I'd been given. I didn't fully grasp that I was also opening doors for others. But that's how progress usually works. Someone has to go first, and their success creates possibilities for those who follow." As evening approached, Sarah made her way to the facility's memorial wall, where the names of fallen Special Operations warriors were engraved in black granite. She often ended her days here, reflecting on the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform and the sacrifices made by those who had gone before. Rodriguez found her there, as he often did during their duty rotations. Their friendship had been forged through shared experiences and mutual respect, proving that even the most challenging beginnings could lead to strong professional partnerships. "The new class looks promising," he observed, joining her at the memorial wall. "They do," Sarah agreed. "Standards haven't changed, but perspectives have evolved. That's healthy progress." Rodriguez smiled at the comment. "You know, I've been thinking about that day at graduation, about how wrong I was in my assumptions." "You weren't wrong about everything," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Your concerns about unit readiness and combat effectiveness were valid. You just applied them incorrectly." "Maybe," Rodriguez conceded, "but I let my biases cloud my judgment. That's dangerous in our line of work." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, honoring the memory of fallen comrades while contemplating the future of their profession. The Special Operations community had been transformed by Sarah's presence. Not through dramatic policy changes or political mandates, but through the simple demonstration that competence and courage weren't limited by traditional expectations. Sarah's legacy extended beyond her own achievements. The female candidates, now progressing through the training pipeline, faced skepticism that was more manageable because she had absorbed the initial resistance. Each successful graduate would make the path easier for those who followed, creating a positive cycle that would eventually make gender irrelevant in these elite units. The sun set behind the training facility as Sarah and Rodriguez made their way back to the main building. Tomorrow would bring new classes, new challenges, and new opportunities to shape the next generation of warriors. The work was never finished, but progress was measurable and meaningful. As they walked, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The confrontation that could have ended her career before it truly began had instead become the foundation for lasting change. The moment when a skeptical senior enlisted man had tried to prove her weakness had demonstrated her strength to an entire community of elite warriors. The story would be told and retold to future generations of Special Operations candidates. Not as an example of conflict between different perspectives, but as a demonstration of how merit ultimately prevails over prejudice. Sarah Chen had become more than a successful operator. She had become proof that excellence recognizes no boundaries except those imposed by dedication, skill, and courage. The lights of the training facility illuminated the path ahead as Sarah prepared for another day of molding warriors who would defend freedom in the world's most dangerous places. Her presence there was no longer remarkable. It was simply another element of an institution that had always prized capability above all other considerations. That transformation, more than any individual achievement, represented the true measure of her success.